Now, when it comes to your news, are you more of a traditional news consumption type of person? Do you lean towards social media? Well, it looks like more and more people are turning to social media influencers for their news. This trend is kind of reshaping how we understand and engage with current events. So joining us to unpack this shift and its implications is Scott Baradell, branding expert, founder of Idea Groove, and author of Trust Signals, Brand Building in a Post-Truth World. Welcome, Scott. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
So this study reveals that about 21% of adults here in the U.S. are turning to social media influencers for their news. Scott, in your opinion, what drives people, especially the younger adults, to rely on influencers for information instead of like traditional news outlets?
Yeah, well, it's 1 in 5 adults, but if you look at younger folks, Gen Z, it's almost 40%. And what's driving this is really just trust. People build relationships with the people they follow on social media, and they trust them. And as we know, the trust in traditional news media has been declining for years. Yeah, no, that's very true. There's a lot out there when it comes to, your legacy news that kind of gives you a little bit of pause for a moment. So how are these news influencers helping people kind of understand current events and civic issues? What do you think makes them more effective than like our traditional journalist? Well, yeah, and more effective. It's not necessarily that they're giving out always the best information.
That's true, too.
There's been real problems with influencers distributing misinformation and conspiracy theories and things like that. However, the thing that they do best is they build a relationship. They're producing content constantly. The people that follow them really trust them. And so if they're responsible, at a high level, look at someone like a Joe Rogan, who's got the biggest podcast going. And, of course, his content is shared all over TikTok, Instagram, and so forth. This is someone who he's never claimed to be a journalist, but, his interview with Donald Trump was, a lot of people think, a big part of the election. And it's because he's built a following by being authentic and being himself. And people identify with him, people trust him, and it doesn't matter that he's not a journalist because of that. Right. No, you're very right about that, Scott. I mean, we know Joe Rogan from Fear Factor. I mean, I always thought he was more of an actor and a comedian. And then the podcast, but with President-elect Trump on there, I was like, this changes the game. This is very different. So with this growing reliance on social media influencers, is it kind of a troubling sign for traditional news outlets? Like, Scott, do I need to start being more of a social media influencer over here? Well, I would say that, terrestrial radio personalities and things like that, you've got everything it takes in terms of having built a following. But, always trying out new media. Like I know a lot of radio stations and syndicates and things have branched out into podcasts and other things. It's kind of just going where the audience is. But, being able to build an audience is the hard part. And you guys have already shown you can do that. Sure. Yeah. Well, but it's a different world though too out here in the radio. I find that the Gen Z listeners are like, "What's radio? What are y'all doing over there? What is this?" As to where like my peeps, the millennials and above, are still on board with us radio folks over here. So we're just kind of hanging on. But Scott, with someone who has written about brand building in the post-truth world, where do you see this balance between traditional journalism and influencers coming into the next decade? Can we coexist? Is this something that we can like cohabitate together? Well, the thing that doesn't get reported as much is, at least for traditional journalist organizations, newspapers, and those that actually have the resources to do reporting, the influencers don't do any reporting. Right. They might do an interview, but basically what they're doing, and this goes back to when the influencers were, say, Rush Limbaugh, all right, that he was an early influencer. You can take him that way. He was not a reporter. He was taking news reported by others, traditional news organizations, and then criticizing it, commenting on it. And that's what a lot of influencers news today. It's a symbiotic relationship that if these influencers didn't have traditional news organizations who are out doing the reporting, they wouldn't have anything to talk about or in many cases complain about. No, and I agree with that too, Scott, because, I mean, we're just being real here. I'm not out here reporting. I don't go and do a journalistic type of job. I really am kind of gathering up the news day to day, reading what's out there, giving my opinion on it. And so, but I do have a background in being a journalist. It's just kind of a weird world that we're in right now.
But when we talk about misinformation, Scott, let's just play around with these drones that are out there, because there's a lot of misinformation on social media by these influencers about this particular topic. How can those new coming influencers in this new world build trust with their followers that they're actually giving us real information?
Well, it's a tough balance, because everyone wants to get views and clicks and comments, and you get that by being out there and controversial sometimes. But if you go out there too far, you start to lose your audience, because you as much as you've done to build an audience, you can lose it pretty quickly if they stop believing in you. And so you've got to be careful about these things. Another great example of the misinformation and some of the repercussions is these influencers that are promoting raw milk, for example. You don't need to pasteurize your milk, and it's much more natural. Well, people are getting sick from that. So just because you trust someone doesn't mean they're going to, sometimes that trust intentionally or unintentionally is taken advantage of.
Yeah, and I think it's becoming harder and harder these days to find out who you can trust and rely on, and you just kind of have to go with your gut, if you will, and use caution. But Scott, I appreciate you hopping on with us this morning. Real fast, where can we find your book, Trust Signals, Brand Building in a Post-Truth World?
Well, just Google Trust Signals, and it's on Amazon. I'd love for you guys to check it out.
Wonderful. Well, we will. We appreciate it very much. Scott, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day out there.
Thank you. You too.
Thank you so much, Scott Baradell. You can find Trust Signals, Brand Building in a Post-Truth World online.